Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Monday, January the 18th edition of Track Announcer's Notebook. Pat Gonzalez back with Stuart and Odell. We've got a very special guest, as you can see from the graphic that's up there. 1972 Daytona 200 winner, Don Emde. We're going to be chatting with Don in a few minutes. But right now, we're going to go to Nodell's notes and catch up on some of the other things happening in the world of motorcycling and motorcycle racing. Stuart?
Thanks, Pat. I actually had an email come this morning. So I know a couple weeks back we had people send in their pictures of their very first motorcycle. And John McBride sent me in this Honda Monkey 50cc bike. And he said actually he wished he still had it because it'd be worth about 20 grand today.
Wow. Thanks to John. Of course, now at Rider's Choice, trying to stay busy.
Yeah, and then we have some sad news. World champion, I think it's pronounced Yoel Robert. He was a 6-time motocross world champion, and he just passed away last week.
And he did come to the United States and did some of the AMA motocross nationals, and just an outstanding rider, probably in his era the best motocross rider in the world.
Yeah, it sounds like from the research I had done, Pat, is he was a real pioneer even in American motocross. Speaking of American, well, Supercross, they had round one at Houston this past week on Saturday night, and Justin Barcia won on the gas. So great debut for that team and that bike.
Ken Roxon finishing second on the Honda. Marvin Muscane finishing third on the KTM. Reigning Supercross champ Eli Tomac on the factory Kawasaki. Not a good night for him. He crashed, ran off the track, ended up battling back to finish 13th. And of course, if you've been with us, you know that the AMA Supercross season, the schedule looks a whole lot different in 2021. Normally they race out in California through the month of January, starting at Anaheim, but due to COVID-19, it is a triple header in Houston. They'll actually be racing round 2 tomorrow night, and then round 3 will be back at the stadium in Houston on Saturday night, and that'll be pretty much how the season runs until they get to Daytona for the Daytona Supercross on Saturday, March the 6th for a single event there. So interesting start to the season, but 5 different brands in the 5 top positions as we look at our winner there on that Red Bull Gas, of course, a brand new team in AMA Supercross.
And then we had some other interesting news just come out earlier today, actually, Pat, and that's Tony Sharpless's Supersonic School. They are going to be the official sponsor for the Canadian Superbike Championship lightweight class. So I think that's a great synergy between what Tony's doing with the O'Valley Mini Superbike Championship and hopefully the riders that will progress, young riders from her series and onwards into the national series riding some of the lightweight bikes.
Well, that's certainly a very fitting sponsorship for the series, and we'll be talking more on future shows about the Supersonic Road Race School. And of course, when Tony had her vision to kick this thing off, she wasn't planning on COVID-19. So they've had to pivot and shuffle, but I'm sure it's going to be a very successful 2021 debut season for the school. And great to see that they're supporting the lightweight sport bike class in CSBK.
And I found it, we talked a little bit on the weekend, Pat, regarding the CCS series racing down at Homestead. And this is Jason Farrell, who won the part of the team challenge in the GTO class aboard a ZX-10R. And a lot of people will recognize Jason as a former Daytona 200. I don't know if he's won the 200. He's definitely qualified in pole. He's won a couple of poles, I think, in recent years, but he hasn't quite won the big one yet.
Well, when Jason wins the 200, we'll get him on Track Announcer's notebook. But certainly an outstanding rider. He's been right there, consistently qualifying in the top 10 the last few years at Daytona. And the races this past weekend at Homestead really kicking off the season. They'll be racing at Roebling Road the middle part of February, and that'll be the final tune-up before everyone heads to Daytona for March 12, 13, 14. We did get news that American Flat Track is not going to be running their opening races right at the Speedway, either the TT that I think was a long shot. We were speculating they go back to the short track for AFT where they ran last October, but the announcement came out just I think about a couple of days ago that the opening rounds are going to be at Barberville at the half mile there at Volusia Speedway, and that is only about maybe 35 minutes northwest of Daytona. So I think they'll be racing there on the Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, and then there was another signing, Brandon Posh, who raced with the HSBK Celtic racing team aboard a Yamaha R6 this past season in the Supersport class as part of the Moto America series. He's now signed with the Dynavolt Triumph team based in the British Supersport Championship. So that's where he'll be competing in the 2021 series. And he's actually the 2019 Moto 3 British Series champion, but he's born and raised in New Jersey, I believe. And it looks like another American's on to the international scene.
Well, that's great news. Very talented rider. But again, that British Supersport Championship is very, very competitive series. And I'm sure he'll be learning some of the racetracks that they'll be racing on this year.
For sure. And some other sad news, Pat. I just got word of this morning, actually. This is the top museum in Austria. And they had a horrendous fire. I believe it was either yesterday or earlier today. And they don't know the extent of the damage yet, but the entire building has been destroyed. And it's located up in the Alps between Austria and Italy.
Looks like they had some incredible old motorcycles there. That's very, very sad. We'll try to get an update for next Monday night show.
For sure. And then that brings us back to the man of the evening.
Number 25 in 1972. Let's welcome Don Emde. And Don, we really appreciate you taking an hour out of your very busy schedule to visit with us on Track Announcer's Notebook, as we're going to revisit your career, some of the people that played big roles in that career, and also in detail recap your 1972 Daytona 200 win, because I think somebody in Hollywood could have written a script as to how things evolved back in March of 1972. First of all, welcome to the show. How are you making out like we all are, dealing with the virus and everything else that's going on these days in the world?
Well, thanks, Pat, for having me on the show. It's nice, honor to be here and everything. And yes, we've been trying to stay healthy and everything, and so far so good. My family, we've been wearing our masks and keeping our distance. And I actually moved my business kind of into a home office now, and so I've been pretty well settled in here. But we still carry on our business, and we're still doing okay with that and staying healthy. So so far it's all good.
And I just want to give a shameless plug here for Don's book, or one of his books. I'm not sure if there are any of the original edition of the Daytona 200, the history of America's premier motorcycle race, approved by the AMA and Daytona International Speedway. We're going to get into the book and the other publications and the part of your career as a writer and publisher and editor, Don. But first of all, take us back to those early years growing up in California. Your dad, Floyd, had won the 1948 Daytona 200 on the beach, riding an Indian Scout. And I don't think you were even born then, but I think he had pretty much retired by the time you came along. What was it like as a kid growing up in that family? Were you in a very motorcycle immersion program?
Well, very much so, Pat. When I grew up, my father, in fact, the winnings of the race, he won on an Indian. It was, in fact, the last Indian that has ever won the Daytona 200. And the prize, first place, was $2,000. and Indian needed another dealer in the San Diego area, and so they actually convinced him to take his $2,000 winnings, and they set him up as an Indian motorcycle dealer. And that was in 1948, just a little bit, about maybe 6 months or so after he had actually won the race. And they were continuing. So by the time I was born in 1951, so as I came along, they were just getting going in their motorcycle business. But I grew up in that whole environment. They were Indian, and then by the time I was old enough to know what was going on, they'd actually converted over to Harley Davidson, because my dad had also had some background with them. And my first memories of being at the store and down in the San Diego area, and finally getting little jobs like wiping up oil into the bikes and emptying the trash cans. But I was around it a lot and everything, and I still got a little bit of little league baseball and a few other things in. But pretty much as I got going more, it was more and more involved in motorcycling. And don't ask me why, but out of every city in the world, San Diego, California, that area actually has created more Daytona 200 winners than any city anywhere. And so I just remember growing up, it was one of his closest friends was Ed Kretz, who was the winner of the very first Daytona 200. And they had little meetings of this group out in California, which actually I'm to this day very involved in myself, that they called the Trailblazers. And they would have a banquets and these gatherings, and my dad would go, and he'd always show, he'd see his old friends Ben Campanelli and Bobby Hill and Dick Clamford, and all these guys would be coming out for the event. But what's funny is the guys from San Diego, eventually there was Joe Leonard, Brad Andres, Ralph White, and as we were going up, it just seemed like every people I was around me a lot had all won the Daytona 200, as had my dad. So it kind of maybe gave you a false confidence that this was should be pretty doable. And so I kind of grew up the idea that someday maybe I should try to win this race. And so. But yeah, and then he had very good connections, and so we were getting a lot of good support. I had guys got into flat track racing and TT racing, and then Mel Dennison, the Yamaha dealer in Bakersfield, California, offered me a ride on his bikes, and he would come to an AFM race, club race out in California, and he'd bring a little 100cc Hodaka, a 250cc GP Yamaha, like a TD1, the TD2s in those years, a 350, and even a 350, we called them production bikes those years. So I'd run 4 or 5 classes a day on a Sunday at tracks like Riverside Raceway or Willow Springs and Carlsbad. And then Friday night, by then I may have already been to Ascot and rode a flat track up there. And so I really had a chance in those early years with all the support that he was able to pull together for me, and did a lot of riding, and it was my life, and I was very focused on winning the 200.
At that point, did you think that you would get to the level where you would become expert in a few years? Were those your ambitions?
Yeah, well, actually, it really worked well because the nice thing about it is at AMA, where you'd race as a novice your first year, then you'd go to what we called amateurs and later called juniors, and then your third year you could become an expert. The club racing in California was so hot that with AFM, that when you entered the 250 GP class or the 350, you were running against all the top riders. And so from 1969, the year that I was only an AMA novice, I was riding against the Suzuki factory team, Art Bauman and Ron Grant, and Jody Nicholas would come, and Don Vesco would be there, and Steve McLaughlin, and on and on and on, numerous riders who were expert class riders. And so, and actually in 1969, I won the AFM #1 championship for the whole season. I was 250 class champion and 350 class champion, and overall in points. So, ahead of like Art Bauman and Ron Grant were behind me in the points. So really early on, I started to get pretty confident that I could do well. In fact, the next year in 1970 would have been my amateur year. We convinced the AMA that even though I still had to go up the ladder in dirt track racing, that my championship there, having beaten all those other expert riders of AMA caliber that I was qualified to ride in that. So actually I got the first time ever the AMA did a split license where I had still to ride the yellow plate, amateur class in dirt track racing and flat track. But in road racing, that 1970, I rode all of the AMA nationals as well as in the 250 class, and I did fairly well. I had in fact my big win with that year was at Talladega. I won the 250 race ahead of Gary Nixon and Cal Rayburn. That was a big win for me, probably really my biggest race win prior to winning Daytona, but it was a big year. So yes, I just got really very quickly into having to race against those top riders, and it just seemed it was very, very natural. I look forward to it. In fact, that's why we actually applied for the white plate in 1970. I just didn't want to be not in the show with it.
Well, you got that white plate. You had some very impressive results to the point where in 1971, you're riding for the BSA factory team going to Daytona, and they had 5 guys on BSAs, including Dick Mann, who had won the 200 the year before on the Honda, and there were also 5 riders on Triumph. So when we talk about the number of factory teams at Daytona, that era probably had 25, 26 factory teams going to the Speedway for the 200.
That year, Pat, they did a really nice kind of pre-race introductions, and they had all of those factory teams you're mentioning out on the grass infield by the start-finish line, and it was amazing. I mean, I was in line. I was sitting next to Mike Hellwood, who they had brought over for BSA. We were there by the numbers, but Dick Mann and Jim Rice and David Aldana was our BSA team, but the Harley Davidson factory team was they had 6 or 8 riders, and as you said, Triumph had 5, and there was about 3 each from Kawasaki and Suzuki, and it was amazing the amount of a couple of Honda riders, Honda 750s were there, so it was an amazing lineup of riders that were going into that race.
For those of you who have just joined us on Track Announcer's Notebook, our special guest is 1972 Daytona 200 winner Don Emde. If you've got a question or a comment, just go into the Q&A, and we'll go to Stuart Nodell here in a bit and get your questions asked or your comments delivered. Don, 1971, you go to Daytona. Very impressive. You finish 3rd in your very first Daytona 200. What do you remember of going to the victory lane at Daytona? Did you think you could finish on the podium?
Well, I qualified in the front row. I was 4th fastest qualifier. That was one of my most nervous starts I ever did in my life. I had my good friend Cal Rayburn to my left and Mike Hillwood to the right, and I was only 20 years old, and I was quite nervous out of all of that. But I was pretty well focused to win. It was a little bit of a disappointment, actually. I guess it was a little bit of an early signal of the financial difficulty that BSA and Triumph companies were going through. But I signed that fall in as a factory rider, and I just kind of assumed we kind of all have the same bikes. But the way it actually kind of worked out is there was only 2 brand new bikes. That Dick Mann and Mike Hellwood rode, but David and Aldana, Jim Rice, and myself, we had the bikes that they had ridden the year before, and same went with the Triumphs. They had 2 the new ones and the others, so it was a little disappointing. They were a little bit off of what they might have all been if we would all have been on the same bikes. But I was very focused on it, and felt I could do well. And I qualified on the front row, and had a good battle with Roger Reben, an old friend that we lost some years ago. The whole way, the whole 200 miles, I raced with Roger back and forth. Would just be able to beat him out. I got 3rd, and he was on his Harley and finished 4th. But it was an exciting race with the amount of factory riders that were in that event.
And Don, back then, no tire changes, and what? Just 1 stop for fuel?
1 stop for fuel, and the BSA. Which was pretty much, I think all of the bikes that year were all on the 1 stop that have too big of issues. The next year with when they got into the big 750 Suzuki's and Kawasaki's, that's when some of the fuel problems started to come in, and they had to do extra changes and that sort of thing.
So 1971 podium at Daytona. I think you had some other pretty good rides on the BSA that year, but the financial woes of BSA and Triumph sort of come to a head at the end of that year. And I think you were getting ready to go on a bit of a motorcycle ride around Thanksgiving, and you get the dreaded letter from the folks at BSA saying, that's it, we only have budget for 2 riders. And I think that ended up being Dick Mann for BSA. And on the Triumph side, I think Gene Romero got the ride for the following year. So where did that leave you, and how long did it take you to put together the ride for Daytona for 72?
Well, you know, Pat, I wasn't shopping for a ride. In fact, I just remember very clearly, we had just run the race, the finale of the season at Ontario, and they had a big garage that the BSA and Triumph were all in. And you'll recall at the other end of the garage, they had the big thing going on with where they were claiming John Cooper's BSA, Bob Bailey, the American rider, and there was a whole big thing going on down there. But the rest of us, we were just kind of cooling off at the other end of the garage. And I remember being with David Aldana and Don Castro from the Triumph team, and we're all about the same age, and we like each other, and we were hanging out. And so we were just talking and just kind of shaking it down. And the race manager, Danny Macias, came over and he said, and I'm sure he believed it at the time, he said, hey guys, we had a great season, and we're going to have the same team next year, and we'll see you guys at Houston Astrodome for the start of the season, which is the TT race. And we all, yeah, that sounds great. And so I pretty much was expecting my contract to arrive. And as you said, it was the day after Thanksgiving down in San Diego area, and I was going to go out to the desert and do some trail riding out there. And the mailman showed up, and I thought, well, there's my contract. And I opened it up, and it was anything but a contract. And it was the letter from Pete Coleman, the vice president, who said, like something like, well, all good things must come to an end at some point, and I have to inform you that there's been a bit of change, and we can't provide you a factory ride any longer. And I think he used some nice words like, this should open up some nice opportunities for you to look for some private sponsorships or something like that. But so I started calling around immediately, and people that I knew, but all of the factory teams were already there. This is the end of late November, and so their teams were all set. And so I ran out of places to call, and then finally I think me and my dad started talking about it, and he said, well, maybe we should just call Mel, Mel Dennison, who I had ridden for before BSA, and see if what he would have. And when I got a hold of him, he said, oh yeah, I would be very interested. And the new magazine in the States, Motorcycle Weekly, with Gavin Tripp and Bruce Cox, were already were talking to Mel about helping out with with Jim Evans, who was an amateur rider, and they were going to help him do some things. And so it all came together, and this was about maybe the middle of December, and I now had the ride with Yamaha and one of the new 6-speed TR3s, and it came together. But we didn't even see the motorcycle till about maybe early February. But I had a chance to ride it once out at Willow Springs to do a shakedown ride on the new 350.
Yeah, how did that shakedown go? Did you look at the bike that you had something that could win going to Daytona?
Yeah, it was a 6-speed, and the year before, Kel Carruthers was now, in fact, he won at Atlanta, and he was a good run with the BSA and Triumphs in 1971. But so I knew from riding the Yamahas in 69 and 70, and then watching Kel in 71, had some good little battles with him, that when it came out that they talked about the extra 6-speed transmission, I suppose I probably put myself into a bunch of little false confidence about a lot of things, but I was starting to talk myself into the idea that the 6-speed at Daytona would be the real magic, magic piece that would really make those run better as far as gearing and how you could gear them up and whatever. So I was actually very confident, having ridden those bikes before and seeing the year before. Now, I didn't really anticipate that the new Suzukis and Kawasaki's were going to be as fast as they were. They were probably almost five to maybe even 10 miles an hour faster around the bowl at Daytona, and they were really just in a kind of a league of their own early on. But they also quickly had some major tire problems with that, and really none of them ended up going over 100, made it to the 100-mile mark. I think Jody Nicholas made it the farthest, he right at about 100 miles. And so, and at the time, nobody was thinking about tire changes and whatever. And when their tires went bad, they were out of the race. So,
how many days back then did it take you to get from California to Daytona Beach? Was that a 2 or a 3 day trek?
We could do it a little bit, about 2 days. Yeah, it was about 50 hours right in there, depending on you stop too many times for eating.
Right. Now, back in 72, the AMA schedule, I think you got some practice early in the week. Then there was the amateur day on Wednesday where you sort of got a day off, and then you're right back at Thursday, qualifying races on Friday. And then the lightweight race on Saturday, and then the 200 would run Sunday. So
right.
You had both the 250 and the TR3 350 for Daytona. So as I recall, you were running very well in the 250 race in the lead pack, and then you crashed in turn one, and your whole weekend could have ended right there. So take us through that story and finally getting the okay to ride on Sunday.
Yeah. Well, it just kind of just started by the time I had won that race at Willow Springs on the shakedown ride, and I really felt I could ride well with the bike, and I really locked in my mind at that point that I was going to win this race, and I was totally focused on that. And in fact, I won a little bet when I got to Daytona. And I, who was having been a BSA rider the year before, they were the importers of Dunlop. And so I had went over to the Dunlop garage to try to get all the tires all lined up. And they said, well, we've only really got the budget to provide for the factory riders. And we will have to sell you those. And so I made them, I told them that, listen, I'll win this race. And I said, so finally we worked out a deal with them that if Paul Butler was, I don't know if you knew him or not, he was had been at Yamaha at some time, but he was with Dunlop then. And I made a deal with him that if I would win the 200, I would get the tires from Dunlop for the whole season. And that eventually then came together. But I was just very, very confident that I was in fact going to win the race. So going through the practice of the qualifyings, when it came down to, in fact, on Friday, I won my heat race over Kenny Roberts. So I beat him, and then there was a second heat race with Gary Fisher and Dave Smith and some of the others in that. And early on in the 250 race on Saturday, Dave Smith and Kenny and I, we were kind of the lead three. And I think Gary Fisher, well, he was with us for a while, and I think something might have happened to his at the finish. But going into turn one, I just leaned the bike over just a little bit too far, and the exhaust pipe grounded out and spun me around and high-sided me onto my shoulder. And we thought that I had broken my shoulder, and so I had to get a ride over to Halifax Hospital to get things X-rayed and all of that. And turned out that I didn't. So we just got back to the hotel, and my mom got me some Epsom salts and got me in a bathtub, and I just got just kind of soaked for hours and hours. And before I left the track, told Bell I'll be ready to go on Sunday. But I had to go to the infield hospital to get my license back Sunday morning out of the whole thing. He had to kind of put me through a whole little test whether my arm was working or not. But I really still at that point I believed all the way that I was gonna win that race.
Indeed. So you make it to the starting line. Those 750 Suzukis and Kawasaki's have got maybe 10 miles an hour on you on the banking, but they've got problems with tires and other mechanical issues that I think all but one about 50 or 60 miles into the race are by the sidelines. So
Yeah.
now you're up there, but before that, your race almost ended because I think the bike actually seized, but then freed up, and you were able to keep going. You almost came into the pits.
I did, Pat. I had about must have been 6 or 7. I think I was running about 10th place. And as you just said, I mean, as you go around the bowl, I could just see the lead bikes just kind of pushing away. In fact, actually, Gary Fisher was up there with them with one of the Honda 754s, Yoshimura bike, similar to what Dick Mann had ridden the year before. And that was a very fast bike. And he was up there, and the rest of them were all the Suzukis and Kawasaki's. You could just see that group kind of pulling away, and I was just in a group with some other 350 Yamahas and some similar bikes. And on about the must have been 6th or 7th lap, going down the back straightaway, the bike started to kind of vibrate, and I could see even the tack was kind of jumping around and everything. And those little bikes, you know, they were easy to have that happen, to have them seize up. And as I went up, but I still was, you know, holding on. But as I went on to that was before the chicane, by the way. So we all the way down the back straightaway and onto the banking. And as I was getting onto the banking, the tack started going down. But I still kind of couldn't believe what was happening, because again, I'm going to win this race. And the tack was kind of going down and down. And so I just kind of held it on. And finally, I got to the point where I wasn't that far from seeing the entrance to the pits, and the tack was starting to go down. So finally I had to clutch it, and I pulled in the clutch, and now I was aimed right at the pit lane, and bikes were starting to kind of move by me, and just something kind of talking to myself, or somebody's talking to me. But basically what I was kind of hearing was, if you go in, you're not going to win. And I just knew it. And so then I thought, well, what now could I hurt to try? So I downshift a couple times, and I just started letting the clutch out slowly, and it kind of barked a little bit, and then finally, and it actually let loose, and it started running. And so that I downshifted a couple of more times, and I kind of turned to the right. Luckily, nobody was coming in, but so I just stayed down on the pad, going out towards the start finish line, and downshifted. And by the time I got into turn 1, I'd lost a lot of positions, but it ran fine the whole rest of the race, and I was back in it.
Yeah, and you're back now at about 30th, but you're starting to claw your way back to the front, and you hook up with a talented Florida rider, Ray Hempstead, and you guys went at it down towards the end of the race. He led for a while. You got back around. Then I think he took the lead with about 4 laps to go, and then you were able to draft a pass and grab the lead and hold on, I think, about 3 laps from the end. What do you remember of the closing laps, and at what point did you think that, yeah, I've got the win finally?
Well, and one thing I'll throw in, actually, when the seizure happened on the motor, that was early in the race. Actually, from there to the mid part of the race, I raced with Phil Reed, and he had gotten kind of a bad start. I don't know why he was as back where he was, but him and we kind of chased each other up to the midpoint of the race, and then he had a bad pit stop, but they're pouring gas all over it, everything on the John Player Norton, and he was out. And that's about the time I did hook up with Ray, and him and I kind of went back and forth. And it's funny, I was on Facebook the other day. I was just reminding, somebody was asking me about some things with Dick Mann. I saw a picture of him in the 72 race, and Dick having won the race the year before, but that year on the BSA, the bike that I guess I was originally wishing I was going to be riding, he and Gene Romero on the Triumph were both having a lot of trouble. They were in and out of the pits apparently all during the day, and Dick actually came out at one point. Maybe about 2/3 of the way through, Ray had got ahead of me and put a little bit of a distance, maybe, a second or so ahead. And then we went into the infield one lap, and we came in. I saw Dick Mann coming out of the pits, and he actually kind of got in between Ray and I. And as we got down the back straightaway that lap, his BSA was running fine, and I was able to draft behind Dick, and he pulled me past Ray, and then in the lead. Then I think he went back in the pits again after that and finished fairly far back. But Ray and I we had a great, we were on identical bikes, and everything was working well, and we just went back. I led we'd each of us would lead for maybe 3 or 4 laps, and the other guy would maybe come by, and then we went back and forth. But I couldn't say that I really knew, because the problem is with no chicane. By the time you came out of the infield at Daytona, you know, it's 2.5 miles around till you come back into the infield again, and you're not looking around. So you couldn't really do anything to know if someone was gaining on you, drafting on you, really where they were. So I got to be honest, even down to when it finally came to about the last lap, I would go. Oh, and I should point out, one thing that was kind of an unknown at the time. One of the riders who had gotten a bad start to come up was Jeff Perry, rider from New Zealand on a 500 Suzuki, and he actually had come up and got in the mix with Ray and I in that second half of the race, and he passed us both and was kind of pulling away. And I remember at one point thinking, when you asked me what I thought I was going to win, I remember at one point thinking, there goes your win. I mean, he had a little bit of an edge on us. And then with only a couple laps to go, he broke a chain and he was out. And a lot of people, the story always was that, that I only won rode the last lap. But if I got time, I'll just finish the story. What actually had happened in those years, we went off the starting line and we did first a kind of a NASCAR lap around the oval before we went into the infield. And Jeff had fouled a spark plug right at the line. And so when the pack took off, they were changing the spark plugs on his Suzuki. And when we came in, I found this out later from the AMA, because they gave me credit for more laps that I had led. We came into the infield when they finally got Jeff's bike running. He just kind of picked up the back end of the field there, and then had made his way up into the end. And so they thought he was actually leading, but at the end, the scorers really figured out that he never made up the 2.5 miles out of the whole thing, which is why the next year the race never ran again off the start over. From then on, you had to go off the starting line right into the infield. But there was no way for Jeff, to even attempt to make up the 2.5 miles. So
yeah. So
anyway,
I was going to say,
that last lap going around, by then, I mean, Jeff was out, and I knew it was by then. It's up to me and Ray, and I gave it as good of a last lap as I could. But all the way till I crossed the line, I didn't know if I kind of envisioned Ray kind of sliding by me or something right at the end. But
well, yeah. we've seen that play out so many times at Daytona, but I guess you were far enough ahead of him that he couldn't hang that draft and get you before the stripe. I take it the late Duke Pennell was the flagman that day.
Yes, he was.
He was an incredible flagman and just an artist in throwing the checkered flag.
I think he really realized that people were going to be taking pictures. He was such a professional. I mean, he was not just waving the flag. He had a little pose he would take for the riders, whatever. And there's so many great pictures of him, and I'm glad to have one of my own with him throwing that flag.
And back in those days, Pat Gonzalez and Richard Chambers weren't announcing, hadn't been to Daytona yet. Roxy Rockwood was the announcer, and you listen to the people who come before you, and Roxy, those early years of going to Daytona definitely influenced some of my announcing style. And knowing Roxy's style, Don, I'm sure he had positioned that it was California against Florida down to the wire and that kind of stuff. I actually was going to try to replicate the last lap on PA, but I figured I wouldn't do the job that Roxy would have done in '72, bringing you to the checkered flag. So I think before we move on, we're going to go to Stuart Nodell, because I think we may have a couple of questions, and then we're going to get to some photos of that day in 1972 and let you comment on them. Stuart?
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Just have a couple of questions here. First from Phil Mahood, and his question to Don is, where did he begin his racing? Was it in flat track like so many other great American racers?
Well, actually, I started out, Stuart, down in San Diego in amateur racing. It was called District 38 down there, and it was really just a little TT track. There was 2 tracks in the San Diego area. One was called the Dehesa, out east of the El Cajon area, a little Indian reservation. They had a track there, and so I had a little Suzuki. My dad built me a 80cc Suzuki, and I did a little bit of TT racing on that for 1 year, and then eventually made it up to a Bultaco Libido 100 in the expert class, and then the I rode a twin pipe Suzuki TM250 in about 68 and then made it in the two. So I just kind of going up the ladder to the 250 expert class and whatever. But then out here, the big goal was to be able to get to Ascot and race there, but that was pro racing. So I did amateur racing in San Diego. I never rode any short track or anything. There was all TT racing, and then getting started in some road racing. So then my pro racing started at Ascot in 1969 on a Suzuki X6 flat track bike.
That's cool. And we have another question from Pete Swedish, and I think part of it you answered with was this before the bus stop was used at the back? And does Don have any speed or any idea of what the top speed was in those days of your bike?
In 1972, as I kind of recall, I think my TR3 would run about 165, 162 to 165, and but the Suzuki and Kawasaki 750 triples were probably running 175, and with a pretty good advantage to it. And so that was the speed on that. As far as the bus stop, 1973 was the first year for that. So they also, not only did they change the starting procedure to have us come off the line right into the infield, but that was the very first year with the chicane on the back straight. The year I won was the last year with no chicane.
And Don, back then in 72, all 80 riders or so went with the drop of the green. Was it in 73 that they went to the 3 waves, 30, 30, and 20, just to space it out? So lots of changes a year later.
Oh, a lot of changes, and there was a lot of the, the tire. The problem was the tires. I mean, again in 72, there wasn't any bike that could even go 100 miles, and so it was a big problem. So that's where the chicane came from, for sure. They were convinced that hitting that back straightaway and then onto the banking, the G forces there was just too much, and they were very nervous about how far those would go.
And
Stuart, I think we got a couple of more.
Is it okay to go a few more here?
Yeah, sure.
So we can do it 2 parts. Doug Donnellan's asked, what bike did you like riding the most?
Well, I guess the Yamahas, treated me the best. As far as did the best on. I really liked the BSA. I just wished I would have had a little better chance to have had all the equal bikes. They had what they call the low boys and the high boys, and it was from there. So the BSA was kind of a fun bike to ride. But really the bike that I won with at Daytona was, the whole power to weight ratio on those bikes was really incredible. What we were able to accomplish. But a lot of people don't realize nowadays, when you have superbike and all the forms of racing, the motors are all the same. It's kind of the same, almost a spec type of a class. For the Yamaha was a 350cc 2-stroke, and we raced. We beat all the 500s, all the 750s. There was 2 strokes and 4 strokes and all the brands, and it was such a great time to be. And that's where tuners like the guy I rode for, Mel Dennison. He was kind of a little bit conservative on some of the. He didn't always try to go for the absolute, most powerful thing, because he knew, again, if you really pushed it too hard, how easy it was to seize the bikes up. But yet there are other guys that could create a little bit more horsepower, but their bikes would have a lot of trouble. But in Mel's case, he, very rarely did I ever have any problems.
And then we have another comment along the same lines: as other than yourself, who is the best rider you've been on track with?
Well, I had a chance to ride in a very amazing time. I think there's people that I had one-off kind of races, like, for example, starting that race in 71 on the BSA alongside Mike Hillwood, and then others. I raced at Imola in the same race with Giacomo Agostini, and so you had riders like that. But just day in and day out, in California. Cal Rayburn and Gary Nixon, one of your Canadians, Yvonne de Hamel, was a great rider, and and really pushed things very hard. But people who watched maybe the movie on any Sunday, that's the time that I was racing when all that was going on, and you'd have just so many riders that were great riders. Gene Romero you mentioned earlier, and it just I did take David Aldana, all of them were just fields of riders. So there's probably, like I think what Pat said earlier, 1971 there was probably 20 to 25 factory bikes on the starting line, plus 60 or 70 more privateers.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. And we've just got one comment here, Pat, if it's okay that I
Yeah,
read.
go ahead.
And it's from Bob Coy. First, he'd like to thank Don for all the diligent work he has done to preserve and document the history of motorcycle racing in America. Too much of the history is being lost as we age out, and the younger generation seems to have little interest in acquiring or preserving it at this point. I'd also like to thank Don for the very generous contributions of his books for raising money for the Daytona 200 monument on the beach in Daytona. His book on the board track racers is certainly the ultimate definitive book on their fascinating and brief history.
Well, it's nice of Bob to say that. He's a great supporter of the sport himself, and he's something I was very happy to help support what he's been working on.
Stuart, why don't we go to some of those incredible images of Don Emde back in 1972, and Don, will let you comment on some of these.
That's the 350 Yamaha that I won with, and it was some of the little things that could kind of stand out that when I look at that, it's funny. You see the front fender. There's a little bit of a it's not tape. It's kind of a little glue thing by guy. And you can also see some duct tape along the fairing along the very bottom there. And that was the kind of preparation that Mel Dennison would do when he put his motorcycles together, things to make sure that, you didn't get beat by a Zeus fastener coming out of the fairing, or a bracket on the front fender breaking, and so type of thing. And he was never afraid to use a little bit of baling wire and duct tape and whatever things would make sure everything was gonna hold together. So
old school. And this is a great shot. There's your dad, Floyd, and you accomplished a lot in '72. First two-stroke, first 350, first father and son duo to win the Daytona 200. This has got to be a very, very special photograph of you. What did Floyd say to you when you first came in after taking the checkered flag, Don?
There was so much excitement going on. I'm not sure. I think he was very happy. But what was nice about that was my mom and dad were both there, and my sister Nancy was there, and my little brother David, and so it was kind of a nice family affair. I remember my mom was doing more talking than my dad was. So I remember her telling me how she had come from the tower up there, and she was with the people from KK Motorcycles, J.R. Kelly and all of them. They had a big suite up there, and she won the pool from having the her bet on me for the whole thing. So she was very excited about all her winnings from that little pool and everything. But my dad was he was great because he opened so many doors with just doing a lot of behind the scenes kind of things. But he was but he never tried to tell me how to ride a motorcycle, do anything. He just kind of helped me get my little deal together. And when it came down to it, it was just that was going to be my time to have to get the job done. So we worked out well.
And looks like, is that the dogleg sweeper in the infield? Looks like it might.
That looks like, maybe getting ready to head back out onto the, I think that's still heading back out onto the oval, because I think I can see the rest of the oval down at the other end of the track there. So that must be exiting the infield, going out into the banking, I think.
Yeah, and you almost got that left knee down on the pavement.
Well, I learned the day before, you get at the time they didn't really have before they got to the slicks and the configurations, riders. I mean, I saw Cal Rayburn, high side, different guys, different times. If you try to push down too far, you started hanging up the motorcycle. So the day before, I ended up getting it down where I, got the exhaust pipe on the ground and it lifted the thing up. And so in those years, if you've got a knee on the ground, the rest of your body was coming with it.
Okay. And I got to take a guess at some of these other riders you're leading. Is 22, is that Phil Reed on the John Player Norton?
Yes, that's about the time that him and I got connected there after the bike had seized up. And that's Phil on the Norton. And then my friend Steve McLaughlin, 55. And number 97 is Ron Pierce. And Steve was on, I believe, a 750 Honda that year. Ron was on a Yamaha TR3 just like mine, but we had a good battle, kind of coming up as we were kind of coming up through the pack. But Phil Reed, what a great rider, he was, Phil's still around, but he was really a great rider at the time. And I had it was really funny was guys like that. Was I had, as I was young, was reading about him and winning the Isle of Man and winning world championships and everything, and now I'm racing with him, and so it was kind of a little hero as well as a competitor. So it was a great time.
And he finished fourth, I think, just off the podium that year.
They messed up his botched up his gas stop really bad, and he came in fourth.
Yeah, and I think Peter Williams was on the second of the John Player Nortons, but he finished well back, I think, about 55th.
Yeah. And that's a favorite shot, and there I am in the winner's circle with my trophy, which I still have here at the house. And
what about
the guys from Bates always gave me a hard time. You know, they had the Bates leathers there, and the people, they threw some plastic oranges around me when I came in. I never even thought about everything. Well, the guys at Bates were always flipped out. They, man, you shouldn't have those oranges around your neck and everything. And I was at Cloud 9. I never thought about that.
Yeah, and Bell Helmets that you went to work at following your racing career. Motorcycle Weekly that sponsored you guys that year as well.
Yes. Yep. I did. I tried to get some good equipment, and I was fortunate to have all that the right stuff on it.
Don, do you know whatever happened to the motorcycle? Is it in a museum somewhere, or
it is? It's in the AMA museum in Ohio. And Mel had kept the bike for a while, and actually couple different guys. I've sold once that Eddie Lawson might have ridden it a couple of times, and Mel, kind of kept it around. But eventually, he retired about maybe 5-6 years later, and sold off some of the bikes. And a guy bought the bike, and then did a donation to the AMA. And it was kind of a little bit rough and a little bit beat up and everything. And actually, Todd Henning. At the time, I knew from racing years and everything, and I was seeing him at some of the ARMA races, and Todd took the bike and restored it back. Fortunately, I had all the little decals and stuff that you see on the tailpiece back there and everything, but Todd did a great job getting it running, and so the bike is back there, and it's in running condition. Okay,
well, post-COVID, I got to get down to the AMA Museum to check it out, and here is Victory Lane at Daytona back in 1972, unlike the Gatorade Victory Lane that we have, but that's the first Victory Lane I saw at Daytona. And there's Hempstead on the 99, who you had a battle with, and then that's Don Vesco with his rider.
Yeah, I don't know what happened at the time with Dave Smith. Was just kind of disappointed and not getting the win, and so he I think Dave just kind of vanished, and so Don was the owner and the tuner of the bike, and so he was there with us and whatever. But Ray Hempstead was him and I had a great ride, and I still see him every 5 or 10 years, and it's good to see him. He's a great guy, and it was good to race with him. That's actually after Daytona. I got invited to go to the match races in England, and that was the form where they were just getting started with Formula 750 racing. And here I was having won Daytona. I kind of stunk up the show, I guess you'd say, for guys who were wanting to see the 750s go. And so I got invited to be on the U.S. team for the second year, but I'd been there the year before with BSA. And they said, you're invited to come to the match races, but you have to have a 750. You can't bring your Yamaha. They said something like the British fans have seen plenty of Yamaha 350s buzzing around. So Bruce Cox and Gavin Tripp from Motorcycle Weekly, they knew his name was Vincent Davey, was the head of a dealership, Norton dealership called Gus Kuhn in London. And they lined this up, and that was a bike that they had. It was really a pretty good little bike. It was a 750 Norton Commando in a Sealy frame. And the Gus Kuhn company, as a dealership, went way back. And it had been really just a racing organization. And I was able to hop on the bike and in the 3 races at the match races. And unfortunately, it had a lot of little gremlins with electrical problems and whatever. But now this is the year before when I was when the match races in England were all BSAs or Triumphs. And so that's David Aldana, number 3, and Jim Rice, number 2. And that's kind of us on our little high boys. And those little works bikes were keeping ahead of us. Now, that's my dad taking the checkered flag in the South Turn at Daytona in 1948. That's Jim Davis was the official flagman then. And so Jim was giving Floyd the checkered flag, and you could still, that's where if you go down to that point by the lighthouse at Daytona, you literally can walk. I think this is about where the little ranger station is, where they'll take your money, down in the south turn at Daytona these days.
And Don, pretty big crowd there, and I think there was estimated 49,000 at the Speedway in '72 when you won.
Yeah. The crowds are starting to build. Now that's my dad, and that's Don Evans, and Don had won the amateur race at Daytona in 1948, and his son Jim Evans was, who I mentioned earlier, was also another second rider on with Bell Dennison, so we had that connection through the year. But that's when Floyd won the 248.
Yeah, I also want to mention, Don, that your dad so instrumental in your racing career, but your younger brother David, who tragically we lost a number of years ago, was an incredible rider on 250 Grand Prix equipment. In fact, the first year, 1977, where 250 Grand Prix became a national championship class, he won the title, and of course had some other incredible rides on the San Jose BMW and Battle of the Twins, and had that amazing race where he was battling with Freddie Spencer for third at Laconia in the wet on that BMW.
Yeah.
Did David travel with you to all of the races? Because I've seen
bit. In fact, there was one of the earlier pictures in that one with the three of us in Victory Lane with Vesco and Ray. I saw a picture. Dave was in the back there and everything. So, and I think that really helped him. I think just being around, like as I was growing up, hearing the stories that my dad had to share, and then it kind of accelerates your experience. And then David, it kind of multiplied that, because as he was going with him, and actually my sister Nancy, my folks would load up a motorhome and they'd meet us at a lot of the races and whatever. But David, absolutely, he had a chance to be there, see my racing, just see how the game is played and how it all came together. And then he was a great rider, and he like you said, he won on a lot of different kinds of bikes. He was national champion in the 250 Yamahas, did a lot with superbikes, won some superbike races, and even was second one year overall at the Suzuka 8-hour in Japan, and so he did very well. We're hated to lose him.
As Bob Coy mentioned earlier in his comments, you've given back so much to the sport, and I think this is a few years ago with Dick Clamford, the three-time winner of the Daytona 200. I know you've been to the monument on the Wednesday for the celebration, and sadly we lost Dick in December of 2019, and we celebrated him on the Wednesday before everything got shut down at Daytona. But he was a very, very special person and rider, and I know he was one of your very, very good friends.
Sure. Well, Dick and Bev both, his wife, they're both gone within whatever, maybe 6 months of each other, and they were just such great supporters. And what a great story that was. I mean, I remember that whole thing with that monument down there. Dick, from being a three-time winner at Daytona, the first three-time winner, and that's why he has the nice City of Daytona trophy, which was a perpetual. And so he made some contacts there, and I remember him talking about back before he created that monument, and I'm going to put a monument on the track. I think most people thought, oh yeah, sure, right in Daytona Beach, right up with all of that. And sure enough, he worked out the arrangement to have the kind of a lifetime or 99-year lease, whatever it was, on that piece of property. Did the fundraising, and he was just worked so hard. And his his wife Bev was behind him, and his daughter Christy and the whole family and Al, they're just we're all totally behind him, and that's something that is such a great tribute to those who race. It's all about the beach, but really, they've done a lot of fundraising stuff where people could buy, put a plaque and different things in, even for road riders and people who race out at the Speedway. And so it's just a great thing for the sport to have it there.
Yeah, indeed. I think you were MC that year at Daytona. Don, I know you're not going to get there this year because of COVID, but assuming the 79th Daytona 200 runs on March the 13th, next year in 2022, we'll be celebrating not only the 80th Daytona 200, but also the 50th anniversary of your 1972 win. And I think we need to put together a very, very special event for that. I know Bob Coy is listening, so I'm sure he's already working on those plans. We didn't get a chance to talk about all the work you've done publishing the Daytona 200 book, the second edition that you came out with, your latest book that won a very prestigious Writers Guild Award. We congratulate you on that. Any plans for either a further updated Daytona 200 book when we hit the 80th, or maybe a book that's about the heritage and the history of the Emde family racing? I think your grandfather was a motorcyclist. Your dad, of course, we've talked about. Yourself, your older brother Bob, I know, did some racing. You, and of course David.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have, publishing is what I do. I have actually a magazine that we put out that goes out to dealers that keeps me very, very busy. And I'm actually just getting started on a book that we're working off of an old scrapbook that I have of a historic writer. So we're probably going to have that out soon. I do hope that someday to have something that really does pull together the history of my family, and with Floyd, especially with all that he had accomplished. But I always tell people, I'm a self-publisher, so I always tell people it's just time and money is the only thing that ever gets in the way of putting all these books out. But we're very happy with how the Speed Kings has done, and yeah, and our indiebooks.com website has got all the things if people want to go check out what we've done, and a little bit about our family and the books and whatever. But I love writing, and I love putting the history together. I collected the things for a lot of years, and that's what I have about a good 40 years worth of collecting early magazines and race programs. And so first it was building the library, and then it makes the writing go much easier if you can really check all your facts that way. So it's worked out good.
So those on the webcast tonight, if they want to purchase Speed Kings or the Daytona 200 books, mdbooks.com, and they can order them online, and you'll ship them up here north of the border.
Sure. We're in a little bit of a hiatus right now with because of the COVID thing as well, and having the post office and all that and everything. But people could get a hold of me, and we'll figure out how to get them a book.
Stuart, I think we may have a couple of other questions on there.
Yeah, we do, Pat. I was actually going to say the same thing, just to encourage people to go to Don's awesome website, because there's some great history and some great photographs there as well. The couple of questions are that Don had mentioned Isle of Man. Did he ever have an interest in racing there?
When I was growing up, I would read in Cycle World and Motorcyclists and things all about the Isle of Man. But the problem was it was in the same weekend as our Loudon race in June. And, and it was just one of the things where, it really wasn't in the cards to do it, as far as trying to figure out in the 60s, how to go do that. But you'd really give up one of next to Daytona. I mean, Loudon was really, our biggest, that Laconia Classic, and it was such an important race. And so it just was, at the time, it really wasn't in the cards to do. And it really, I was the match races that I got to do. So at least I did get to ride tracks, some very famous British tracks, Brands Hatch and Mallory Park and Knowlton Park, and as well. And then later we got to go to Europe to race Imola, the first 200 that they ran in 1972. But I've been to the Isle of Man twice since then. It's an amazing race to watch, that's for sure. But I wasn't close enough around to it to get to race it.
Don, speaking of Laconia, I know their 100th anniversary is coming up, I think, in a couple of years. Any thoughts about doing a book on Laconia, because it has such a long and glorious history?
I don't have a plan on it, Pat, at the moment, or whatever. There could well be maybe some magazine publications or something like that and everything. I think the little list of some things that I hope to get done probably will preclude getting that far along, but something should be done. I mean, that history, a lot of people don't realize the same year that I achieved the same thing my father had done at Daytona, my good friend Gary Fisher did what his dad Ed had done also. Ed was a Laconia winner, and then in 1972, the same year I won Daytona, Gary won at Loudon, which matched then his dad's victory at Laconia. So we have that little father-son connection.
Stuart, anything else before we wrap up what's been a very fast 1 hour with Don Emde.
Yes,
Yeah, I think just overall, Pat, I just, like everybody else, just want to thank Don for joining us. Everybody's just loves the stories and just think you're a fantastic guest and very articulate. So thank you.
thank you.
Don, we want to thank you again for coming on Track Announcer's Notebook. We can't get to the racetrack, so we got to do things like these to keep us
Yeah.
all connected. I know I won't see you in March, but hopefully 2022, COVID is in our rearview mirror, and we can all gather again at Daytona. And I think it is going to be one incredible Daytona 200 celebration. And we'll also be celebrating the 50th of your 1972 victory.
Sounds great.
Stay safe and be well.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Don
Bye.
Emde. Well, that'll wrap up this edition of Track Announcer's Notebook. Our thanks again to Don Emde for being our very special guest tonight. Our thanks to my co-host, Stuart Nodell. Have a great week. Remember, tomorrow night, round 2 of the AMA Supercross in Houston, and we'll be